The streets were busy, people rushing past each other, barely noticing anyone else. The sound of footsteps echoed in the cold, rainy air. But amidst the noise and the bustle, there was a mother who wasn't moving. She stood near the sidewalk, holding her child close to her chest, her thin, trembling arms wrapped around him. Her name was Lyra, an alien from a far-off planet, far from the familiar landscapes of her home. She had never planned to be here, on this strange world, alone and desperate. The child in her arms, a small boy with wide, frightened eyes, was all she had left. He was sick, burning with fever, and barely able to breathe. His condition was growing worse with each passing hour. Lyra's heart ached as she looked down at him. She could feel the heat radiating off his tiny body. She couldn't lose him, not after everything she had gone through. She had escaped from a cruel life, searching for refuge and peace. But now, standing in this unfamiliar place, she didn't know where to turn. She wasn't from around here. Her people were once proud and mighty, but her planet was no longer the place she remembered. Wars, starvation, and betrayal had torn it apart. Lyra had left all that behind, running from a past too painful to think about. She had hoped to find a better life. But now, here on Earth, things were no better. The streets were filled with strangers who walked right past her. Lyra's voice broke as she spoke, her words soft and pleading. Please, please help my child. He's dying. I don't have much time. Her accent was thick, strange, and foreign. It was clear she didn't belong here. People stared at her for a moment, some curious, others fearful, but no one stopped. She looked around, hoping someone would show mercy. A mother walking with her child glanced at Lyra, but quickly turned away. A businessman in a sharp suit brushed past without a second glance. Even the homeless man sitting on the corner didn't bother to acknowledge her. Her heart sank. She had expected rejection. It was what she was used to. But today, it felt heavier than ever. The boy in her arms coughed weakly, his little body racked with pain. Lyra's eyes filled with tears, but she refused to let them fall. She couldn't cry, not now. She had to stay strong for him. Please, someone, anyone, she whispered, her voice breaking. I don't want him to die. She had heard stories of the kindness of humans, of how they helped one another in times of need. But now, standing here, she felt nothing but the cold indifference of the world. The more she begged, the more invisible she became. The world seemed so big and yet so empty. The city around her was alive with movement, but there was no warmth, no help. She wasn't sure how much longer she could hold on. The child's breathing grew weaker with every passing minute. She could feel the end coming, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Lyra was tired. Tired of running. Tired of hiding. Tired of fighting a battle she couldn't win. She had been running her whole life, trying to escape the things she couldn't change, the things she couldn't fix. And now, standing here in the rain with her child, she realized how alone she truly was. The street around her felt like a prison. The world was spinning and she was stuck, unable to move. She glanced up at the sky, her heart heavy with grief. Was this the end? Was this all she could hope for? Nothing but rejection and fear? But then, something shifted. In the distance, a figure approached. He wasn't like the others. He didn't walk with the same hurried steps, nor did he pass by without a second thought. His face was kind, his eyes soft. There was something different about him. He didn't look away when he saw her. He stopped. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. Could this be real? Did he see them? Was there hope after all? The human man stood there looking at her with concern. His eyes seemed to see her, not just the alien, not just the outcast, but the mother who was desperate to save her child. He took a cautious step forward, his voice gentle but clear. Are you okay? He asked, his words simple, but they carried an unexpected warmth. Lyra's heart pounded. She could hardly believe it. For the first time since arriving on this planet, someone had noticed her. Someone cared. The man took another step, kneeling down in front of her. His gaze moved from Lyra's tear-streaked face to the small child in her arms. He looked at the boy's pale, sweating face and then back at Lyra. "You need help," he said, the words barely a whisper, but they were filled with kindness. He didn't hesitate. Lyra's eyes filled with tears, but she quickly wiped them away. She had to stay strong. For him, for her son. "Yes, please," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "He needs help." The man's face softened as he nodded. "I'll help you. I won't leave you." For the first time, Lyra allowed herself to hope. She wasn't alone anymore. And maybe, just maybe, this human would be the one to change everything. Lyra's heart raced as the human man helped her to her feet, his gentle hand supporting her trembling form. For a moment, she wasn't sure if she was dreaming. Was it really possible for someone to care about them? She had been abandoned by her own people, left to wander in a foreign world, and now this human had seen her, seen them, when no one else had. The man spoke again, his voice filled with warmth, though there was an undertone of concern. "Where do you need to go? I can help." His words were simple, but they carried an undeniable sincerity. Lyra looked down at her son, who was barely clinging to life. His small body was limp in her arms, and his once bright eyes had dulled to a tired, lifeless gaze. Every second that passed felt like a heavy weight pressing down on her chest. She couldn't let him die like this, not after everything they had been through. "I don't know where to go," Lyra whispered, her voice filled with despair. "I don't have anywhere to turn. I don't even know if there is a place for us here." She felt the hopelessness deep in her soul. Her eyes welled up with tears again, but she refused to let them fall. She couldn't show weakness, not now. The human man stood silent for a moment, processing her words. His eyes shifted from her to the child, and then to the crowded street around them. People continued to rush by, oblivious to their pain, their struggle. It was as if they were invisible. He didn't hesitate. "There's a clinic not far from here. I can get you there. They'll have the tools to help your son." Lyra's heart fluttered, a flicker of hope igniting inside her. A clinic? It sounded too good to be true. She had heard of places where humans could get help, but she didn't know where to find them or if they would even accept an alien like her. But the look in the man's eyes, so kind, so determined, made her believe that he wasn't lying. "Please," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Please take us." The man didn't waste any time. He moved quickly, helping Lyra walk with her son in her arms. She could feel his warmth beside her, a stark contrast to the cold, empty streets around them. They passed by shops, cars, and towering buildings, but the world felt so distant, so uncaring. No one stopped to look at them. No one paused to question why an alien mother was carrying her dying child through the streets. Lyra couldn't help but wonder if this was all just a dream. How many times had she wished for someone to care, to see them for what they were? Not just outsiders, not just the strange alien race that everyone feared. But this man, this stranger, saw them. He saw her child, and he didn't turn away. As they walked, the city around them seemed to blur into the background. Lyra's mind was focused solely on her son. His breathing was shallow now, the heat of his fever still burning through her skin. She could feel the life slowly draining from him, and it terrified her. She hadn't been able to protect him before when the world had torn everything apart. Now here she was with a chance to save him, but she was so afraid of losing him. The man glanced over at her, his expression serious. "Don't worry, we're almost there." Lyra nodded, though she wasn't sure if she believed him. She had heard such words before from people who promised her safety, but nothing ever came of it. Would this time be different? Could a human really make a difference in their lives? They reached the clinic after what felt like an eternity. The building was small, nothing compared to the towering structures she had seen in other parts of the city, but it had a kind of quiet comfort to it. The sign above the door read Emergency Care Center, and there was a feeling of calm that Lyra couldn't remember experiencing before. The man pushed open the door and they stepped inside. The warm air inside was a sharp contrast to the cold rain outside, and the smell of antiseptic filled the room. A nurse at the front desk looked up as they entered, her eyes scanning Lyra and her son. She hesitated for a moment, then quickly stood, rushing over to them. "Is this child in danger?" the nurse asked, her voice calm but urgent. The human man nodded, his expression grim. "He's burning with fever. His breathing is shallow. We need help." Lyra held her breath, watching the nurse's reaction closely. She didn't know what to expect. Would they refuse them? Would they push them away like so many others had? To her surprise, the nurse didn't hesitate. "Bring him here," she said, motioning toward a bed in the corner. "We'll do what we can." Lyra carefully placed her son on the bed, the nurse immediately beginning to check his vitals. The human man stayed by her side, his eyes fixed on the child as the nurse worked quickly, moving around with practiced efficiency. Lyra stood back, her heart in her throat, praying that they could save him. She felt so small in this place, so out of place, but here, at least there were people who didn't look away. As the nurse administered medicine and adjusted equipment, Lyra could only stand in silence, waiting. She could hear her son's breathing, a bit more steady now, and for the first time since they had arrived on Earth, she dared to believe that maybe, just maybe, they would be okay. The human man placed a hand gently on her shoulder, offering her a reassuring smile. "He's in good hands now," he said softly. Lyra nodded, the weight in her chest slowly lifting. She had no idea what the future held, but for the first time in so long, she had a sense of hope. They weren't alone. Not anymore. The room was quiet, the soft beep of machines the only sound. Lyra stood by the bed, her heart racing as she watched her son. His small body, pale and fragile, lay on the clean sheets. The human nurse moved quickly around the room, administering medicine and checking the boy's vitals. Lyra could hardly believe that just hours ago, they had been alone on the streets, abandoned and invisible to the world. And now, here they were inside a safe place with the possibility of a future for the first time in so long. The human man, who had led them here, stood quietly beside her. He hadn't said much since they arrived, but his presence was a constant comfort. There was a quiet strength in the way he looked at her son, a determination that spoke volumes. Lyra couldn't understand why he had helped them, why he had chosen to care when everyone else had turned away, but she didn't question it. She couldn't. Not now. As the nurse moved around the room, adjusting the machines and checking the boy's temperature, the human man stepped closer to Lyra. He looked down at her son, his eyes soft. "He's going to be okay," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "The fever is high, but it's not the end. We'll get him through this." Lyra nodded, though she wasn't sure if she believed him. She had heard words like that before, promises from people who had no idea what it felt like to lose someone you loved. Her heart ached as she watched her son, his breathing slow but steady. He still looked so fragile, so small. But at least now, there was a chance. The man reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device. He looked at it briefly before turning, his attention back to Lyra. "I'll make sure you both have somewhere to stay," he said. "I'll find a place where you can rest while he recovers." Lyra's heart skipped a beat. She had been on the move for so long, never staying in one place long enough to feel safe. The idea of having a place to rest, a place where they could be safe, felt like a distant dream. She had never dared to believe such a thing could happen, not after everything she had been through. But this man, this stranger, was offering her a chance she never thought she'd have. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice shaky. She didn't know how to express the gratitude she felt. Words felt so small, so meaningless compared to what he had done for them, but it was all she had. The man gave her a reassuring smile. "Don't mention it. You've been through enough." He glanced at the boy again. We'll take it one step at a time." Lyra looked down at her son, her eyes brimming with tears. She had spent so many nights wondering if she would ever be able to give him a future, a life free from the pain and hardship they had known. And now for the first time it felt possible. But she couldn't forget where they had come from, the cold streets, the desperation, the loneliness. She couldn't forget how close they had come to losing everything. The door to the room opened, and a new nurse stepped inside. She was younger, with short black hair and a bright smile that seemed out of place in the sterile environment. She walked over to the bed and began speaking to the first nurse, asking about the boy's progress. Lyra watched them for a moment, feeling an unfamiliar sense of relief. There were people here who cared, people who wanted to help. "Is there anything I can do for you?" the human man asked, his voice gentle. Lyra looked at him, surprised by the question. She hadn't expected him to offer more. He had already done so much. But here he was, still asking if there was anything more he could do. It was almost too much to take in. She felt a lump rise in her throat, but she swallowed. "Eye it down." "I don't know," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to repay you." The man shook his head. "You don't have to repay me, just get some rest. You deserve it." Lyra felt a strange warmth spread through her chest. She had spent so long fighting, surviving, that she had forgotten what it felt like to truly rest. She had forgotten what it felt like to trust. But here, in this room, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. The human man sat down in the chair beside the bed, his gaze never leaving her son. "I don't know what your world is like," he said quietly, "but I know what it feels like to protect someone you love. I can't imagine how hard it must be for you." Lyra stared at him, surprised by the honesty in his voice. He didn't judge her, didn't look at her with fear or pity. He simply understood, or at least tried to, and that, more than anything, made her believe that perhaps there was more kindness in this world than she had ever imagined. "Thank you," she said again, her voice trembling. It wasn't enough, but it was all she could offer. The man nodded, his eyes soft. "It's no problem, I'm just glad I was here when you needed help." For the first time, Lyra allowed herself to believe that she had found a place where they could belong. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and it was the beginning of something new. As the nurse continued to check on the boy, Lyra sat beside him, her heart swelling with gratitude. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone anymore. The hours felt like days as Lyra sat quietly by the bed, watching her son's slow recovery. The human man had not left their side since they had arrived at the clinic. He had insisted on staying, his eyes constantly flickering between the boy and Lyra, as if making sure nothing would go wrong. Every now and then he would ask the nurses for updates, his voice calm but filled with concern. He was determined to see this through, and Lyra found herself both touched and overwhelmed by his presence. Her mind swirled with questions. Why had he stayed? Why had he gone out of his way to help them when no one else had? There was no way to answer those questions, no way to fully understand the kindness of a stranger. But she knew that for the first time in a long while she felt safe, and that feeling, though fleeting, was worth everything. It was late now and the clinic had quieted down. The nurses had given the boy his last dose of medication for the night, and the hum of the machines had softened to a comforting rhythm. Lyra could finally breathe a little easier, her son's breathing deepening, less labored than it had been earlier. Still, his fever hadn't fully subsided. She reached out and brushed a lock of hair away from his forehead, her fingers gently brushing against his skin. The human man, still standing at the foot of the bed, finally turned to face her. He met her gaze, his expression soft but firm. There was something different about the way he looked at her now, something that made her heart skip a beat. It was as if in that moment he wasn't just helping them out of kindness, he was making a decision, and that decision would change everything. "You're not alone in this," he said quietly, his voice steady and filled with sincerity. "I'm not going anywhere. I can't just leave you here." Lyra blinked, her throat tightening. She hadn't expected him to say anything like that. In the few short hours since they had met, he had given her more than anyone else had ever offered. But this felt like something more than just kindness. It felt like a promise that despite everything, they wouldn't have to face the world alone. "Why?" Lyra whispered, her voice barely audible. She didn't know why she asked the question. She had no right to ask it, no right to expect anything from him. But the words slipped out before she could stop them. "Why are you doing this for us?" The man's eyes softened, and for a moment, it was as if he was seeing something in her that she hadn't allowed herself to see. "I don't know," he admitted, shrugging slightly. "Maybe it's because I can't stand to see someone suffer. Or maybe it's because you remind me of something I've forgotten. The importance of compassion. I don't need a reason. I just know it's the right thing to do." Lyra looked away, unable to meet his gaze. She didn't know how to process his words. She had never been shown such care, such selflessness. Her heart was filled with gratitude, but there was also a knot of uncertainty. Could she trust him? Could she really believe that this human, someone from a completely different world, would follow through on his promise? "I'm scared," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What if this is just a dream? What if you leave us too?" The man knelt beside her, his hand resting gently on hers. The warmth of his touch sent a shiver through her, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she didn't feel completely alone. He was here, he was real, and he hadn't turned away. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, his voice steady and full of conviction. "I'm here for as long as you need me. I'll stay with you and your son, and I'll make sure you both have what you need to get through this. You don't have to worry." Lyra felt a rush of emotion rise up in her chest, a wave of relief that nearly brought her to tears. She had spent so long fighting alone, always running, always hiding. She had never had anyone to trust, anyone to rely on. But now, for the first time, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she had found a place where she belonged. The human man smiled gently, giving her hand a reassuring squeeze. "You don't have to face the world alone anymore. Lyra, I'll be here." It was a simple promise, but it meant everything. Lyra nodded, unable to find the words to express how deeply she felt. She looked down at her son, who was still sleeping peacefully. The worst of the fever had passed, and his breathing was more steady now. But there was still so much uncertainty ahead. The road to recovery would be long, and Lyra knew there were many dangers waiting for them in this strange world. But for the first time, she wasn't facing it alone. The man stood up, his eyes soft as he looked at her. "I'll get you both settled somewhere safe. You need rest and you need time to heal. But we'll figure this out together." Lyra's heart swelled with gratitude. For the first time in her life, she could see a future beyond the survival and the endless struggle. She could see a future where her son grew strong again, a future where she could be something more than just a fugitive running from the past. With the human's help, anything seemed possible. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You don't have to," the man replied with a soft smile. "Just promise me one thing." "What?" "That you'll take the time to heal, to let yourself rest. You've been through so much. You deserve a chance to live without fear." Lyra nodded, the weight on her shoulders lifting just a little. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make her believe that maybe, just maybe, she had found a place where she could belong. A place where her son could grow up safe, without the constant fear of being hunted or rejected. The future was still uncertain, but it felt a little brighter now, and that was all she could ask for. The sun had set, leaving the world drenched in a dim, orange glow. Lyra sat quietly by her son's side, her fingers gently brushing the boy's hair. The clinic was a place of relative calm, but the weight of the day still clung to her. Despite the help they had received, the fear still gripped her heart. Her son was improving, yes, but the world beyond the clinic's doors remained a vast, frightening unknown. The human man, whose name Lyra had learned was Adam, had kept his promise. He stayed by their side, offering reassurance and warmth, but there was an unspoken tension hanging in the air. His eyes were filled with determination, but Lyra could sense the fatigue that had settled deep in his bones. He had helped them, given them shelter, and now it was time to leave the clinic and move forward. But where to? What awaited them outside? Adam stood by the window, looking out at the darkened streets. Lyra watched him, noticing the quiet strength in his posture. He had come into their lives like a storm, unexpected, powerful, but with a steady hand. He had done so much for them already, but Lyra knew he couldn't stay forever. There was a limit to what one person could do. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken thoughts. Finally, Adam turned to her, his gaze gentle but serious. "We need to move, Lyra. Your son can't stay here forever, and I don't want you to feel like you're a burden. There's a place I know where we can hide, where you and your son can rest. It's not much, but it's safe. We can start fresh there." Lyra's heart skipped a beat. The idea of leaving the safety of the clinic filled her with both hope and dread. What if the world outside was just as cruel as the one they had already known? What if they were rejected again? She couldn't let herself think that way, not when her son's life depended on it. She looked down at him, his small chest rising and falling with a steady rhythm. He was sleeping peacefully now. The fever mostly gone and his color had returned. The relief that flooded her heart was mixed with an overwhelming sense of guilt. She was so grateful for Adam's kindness, but it still felt like she was asking too much of him. "I can't ask you to do more for us," she whispered, her voice shaky with emotion. "You've already given us so much. I don't even know how to repay you." Adam shook his head, a soft smile playing on his lips. "You don't have to repay me. I'm doing this because it's the right thing to do. You've been through enough. You deserve peace." Lyra's heart ached at his words. She had never known peace, at least not the kind he spoke of. She had spent her life running, hiding, always fearing the worst. But now, for the first time, she felt like she might have found a place where they could breathe, where they could heal. "I'll go with you," Lyra said, her voice steady. "We'll go wherever you think is best. But please, if it's dangerous, I need to know. I won't drag my son into something we can't survive." Adam's face softened as he looked at her, his eyes filled with understanding. "I won't take you anywhere unsafe. I promise." It was all she needed to hear. The decision was made. As the night deepened, Adam carefully arranged for their departure. They couldn't stay in the clinic any longer than necessary. Lyra knew that the longer they stayed, the more likely it was. Someone would discover their presence, someone would ask questions. Her alien appearance alone made her an outcast, and in a city full of suspicion, that could be deadly. The clinic's door closed behind them as they stepped out into the cool night air. The streets were quieter now, the usual hum of activity replaced by the occasional sound of footsteps and distant car engines. Lyra felt a pang of unease as she walked beside Adam, her son still cradled in her arms. The streetlights cast long shadows, and the darkness seemed to swallow them whole. Adam led them down narrow alleyways, avoiding the more crowded parts of the city. Lyra kept her head down, trying to remain as inconspicuous as possible. Her senses were on high alert, her mind racing with thoughts of what might lie ahead. How much further could they go? Where was this place that Adam spoke of? And what would happen when they got there? Despite the fear clawing at her chest, there was something else too, a small but growing flame of hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, they had a chance to live. A chance to escape the endless fight for survival. After what felt like hours, they reached a small, unassuming building tucked away in a quiet corner of the city. The walls were old and the windows were dimly lit, but there was a sense of peace about it that Lyra hadn't felt in a long time. Adam unlocked the door and they stepped inside. The room was simple, a small living space with a few basic pieces of furniture. There was a couch in the corner, a small kitchen, and a bed tucked away in the back. It wasn't much, but it felt like more than Lyra had ever dreamed of. "This is where you'll stay," Adam said, turning to her with a tired smile. "It's not much, but it's safe. You and your son can rest here. No one will bother you." Lyra felt a wave of relief wash over her as she looked around the room. It was quiet, private, and far from the chaos of the city. Here, she could breathe. Here, she could finally let her guard down. For the first time, she allowed herself to relax, to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could have a future. Her son stirred in her arms, his small hands curling into fists as he shifted in his sleep. Lyra placed him gently on the bed, her heart swelling with emotion. He was safe. He was going to be okay. As she sat beside him, Adam sat down across the room, his tired eyes watching her quietly. They had both been through so much, but now they were here, together. "I'll go get some food," Adam said after a moment. "You should rest. I'll be back soon." Lyra nodded, her voice soft. "Thank you." As the door closed behind him, Lyra sat in the quiet watching her son sleep. It wasn't perfect, they weren't safe yet. But in this small room, surrounded by kindness, Lyra allowed herself to feel something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The days that followed felt like a blur, and yet they also felt like the calmest Lyra had experienced in years. The small, quiet room Adam had led them to became a refuge. It wasn't much. A few basic comforts, but it was theirs. Lyra had never known a place like this, where she didn't feel like an outsider, a fugitive running from something she couldn't outrun. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel the constant gnawing fear in her chest. Her son, whom she had almost lost, began to show signs of improvement. His fever had finally broken, and although his body was still frail, the life was slowly returning to his eyes. Lyra spent her days by his side, caring for him and keeping him close. Her heart swelled with love every time she looked at him. She had nearly lost him, but now it seemed like he might have a chance at life again. It wasn't easy, though. The memories of everything they had gone through, the long journey, the hunger, the fear, kept creeping back into her mind. It was difficult to let go of the past, even with the hope that Adam had brought into their lives. She had been alone for so long, forced to fight for everything, to protect her son against a world that showed no mercy. But Adam had changed that. From the very beginning, he had shown her a kindness she hadn't known was possible. He had promised not to leave, and he had kept that promise. Every day he showed up, whether to make sure her son had the care he needed or to simply sit with her and make sure she wasn't alone. He had never asked for anything in return, never made her feel like she owed him. His kindness was unconditional. One evening, as Lyra sat by her son's side watching him sleep peacefully, Adam came into the room. He was carrying a small bag, the faint scent of food drifting from it. His face was tired, but his eyes bright with determination. "I brought some food," he said softly, setting the bag down on the table. "I thought you might be hungry." Lyra looked up at him, a small smile forming on her lips. "Thank you," she replied quietly. She hadn't realized how much she'd missed the simple act of sharing a meal. It felt like a small luxury, a moment of normalcy in a life that had been anything but. As Adam set the food down and sat beside her, he glanced at the boy who was still fast asleep. "He's looking better," he said, his voice filled with relief. Lyra nodded, her heart full. "He's strong. I knew he would fight, but I didn't think it would be this fast." She paused for a moment, her eyes softening as she looked down at her son. "I can't believe we're here. I can't believe he's going to be okay." Adam leaned back, his eyes studying her closely. "He's going to be more than okay," he said quietly. "You're both going to be okay. This is just the beginning." His words were simple, but Lyra felt their weight. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could have a future where her son wasn't sick and fragile, where they weren't constantly on the run, hiding from danger, It was a dream she had buried deep within her heart, a dream she hadn't allowed herself to hope for in so long. As the night wore on, they ate in silence, the only sound in the room the soft murmur of the city outside. It felt peaceful. It felt safe. For the first time since they had arrived on Earth, Lyra allowed herself to believe that there might be a place for them here, a place where they could truly rest. After they finished eating, Adam stood and stretched. "I'm going to take a walk. You stay with him, okay? He's in good hands." Lyra nodded, though she didn't want him to go. She had grown so accustomed to him being there, to his presence providing a quiet sense of security. But she understood. Adam needed his own space too. The weight of caring for them had to be heavy, even if he never showed it. She had no idea what kind of life he had left behind to help them, but she was grateful. Grateful for every moment, every small act of kindness he had given them. As Adam stepped out of the room, Lyra returned to her son's side. She gently adjusted the blanket around him and sat back down, watching him sleep. Her thoughts turned to the future. What it would look like for them now. What would happen when her son was strong enough to move on, to leave this place behind? Would they stay here with Adam? Could they? She knew that there was still a long way to go. The world beyond their small room was vast and uncertain, and there were still dangers lurking out there. She had no illusions about that. But for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was facing it alone. Adam had shown her that there was kindness in the world. Real, honest kindness. And for that she would be forever grateful. Her son stirred, his small hand reaching out as if sensing her thoughts. She gently took his hand in hers, feeling his warmth, feeling his life returning. "You're going to be okay," she whispered softly, her voice filled with love. "We're going to be okay." The morning light filtered through the small window, casting soft beams of gold across the room. Lyra woke slowly, the weight of the night's dream still heavy in her chest. She glanced at her son, who was curled, up beside her, his breathing steady and deep. A sense of peace settled in her heart, a peace she hadn't known in so long. For the first time she wasn't looking over her shoulder, fearing the next threat or danger. They were safe, at least, for now. And for her, that was enough. She sat up, careful not to disturb her son, and walked quietly to the window. The streets outside were still, the usual morning rush yet to begin. It was almost too quiet. She had spent so many years in fear, never knowing when the next threat would come. But here, in this small room, she felt an unfamiliar calm. The world outside was still a mystery to her. The city was a maze of unfamiliar faces and places, and though she had started to trust Adam, she knew there was still so much to learn. Her heart still carried the scars of her past, the pain of a life spent on the run. But here, in this strange city, in this humble room, she could feel something stirring within her, a hope she hadn't allowed herself to believe in for years. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts, and Lyra quickly turned, her heart racing for a moment. But then she remembered where she was. It wasn't the sound of danger. It was Adam. "Come in," she called softly, her voice hoarse from the quiet of the morning. Adam entered, his tired eyes brightening as he saw her sitting by the window. He had been gone for a few hours, but he hadn't said much when he returned. His absence had felt like a small hole in the room. But now, with him here, the space felt complete again. "How's he doing?" Adam asked, his voice calm but concerned as he glanced at her son, still sleeping peacefully. "Better," Lyra replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "His fever hasn't returned. He's sleeping soundly." She let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. "It's like a miracle." Adam smiled softly, relief flooding his face. "I'm glad. He's a strong one, just like his mother." Lyra's heart skipped at his words. She hadn't thought of herself as strong for so long, not after everything that had happened. She had been running, hiding, trying to survive, but strength wasn't something she had allowed herself to acknowledge. But now, with Adam's words, something inside her shifted. Maybe she had been stronger than she realized. She stood up and walked over to her son's side. Gently, she placed a hand on his small head, brushing the hair from his forehead. His warmth was comforting, and the small smile on his face made her heart swell. She was so grateful, so very thankful. Adam's footsteps echoed behind her as he approached, standing quietly by her side. They shared a long, silent moment, each of them looking down at the boy who had brought them together in ways neither of them had expected. "You've both been through so much," Adam said, his voice filled with sincerity. "But I believe things are starting to change. You don't have to keep running. You found a place where you can rest, and I'll help you make sure that this is only the beginning." Lyra looked up at him, her chest tight with emotion she couldn't fully put into words. "I never thought I'd have a chance at something like this. A life without fear, without constant running. It feels unreal." "It's real," Adam assured her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "You deserve this. Both of you." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, and for a moment, she couldn't speak. She had spent so much of her life living in the shadows, fighting just to survive. But now she felt something different, a sense of peace, of belonging. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about living, and that was something she hadn't allowed herself to think about in so long. "I don't know where to begin," Lyra said softly, her voice shaking. "It's all so new. I don't even know how to trust the world anymore." Adam smiled, his eyes soft with understanding. "You don't have to have all the answers right now. One step at a time. You've already taken the hardest one. Accepting help." Lyra's heart ached at his words. She had spent so long pushing people away, afraid of trusting anyone again. But now she realized that she had already taken the biggest step of all. She had allowed herself to hope. And with hope came possibility. "We'll figure it out," Lyra said, the weight in her voice now filled with conviction. "Together." Adam nodded, his expression one of quiet satisfaction. "Exactly, we'll take it one step at a time." As the morning sun rose higher in the sky, Lyra looked at the boy in her arms, the child who had brought them all together. He was still fragile, still in need of care, but he was alive. And that was more than she had dared to hope for, more than she had thought possible. With Adam by her side, Lyra knew that their journey wasn't over. There would still be challenges, there would still be hardships, but now they had something they hadn't had before: each other. And with that, there was hope. There was strength. For the first time in a long time, Lyra allowed herself to truly believe in the future. It wasn't perfect, and it would never be easy, but it was theirs, and that was enough. The new beginning had already started, and for Lyra, that was everything. The words felt like a promise, one she intended to keep. She wouldn't let anything happen to him, not now that they had a chance, not now that they had hope. Outside, the city hummed quietly, the night deepening. But inside the small room, Lyra felt a sense of peace settle over her. For the first time, she allowed herself to dream, to believe in a future where she and her son could be safe, where they could heal and build a life together. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough.